So, we're back at it again to continue complaining about the Dragon Prince Season 4, because, well, I guess that's a thing that I do now. And honestly, I do hate to be a Debbie Downer, but the reality is that the latest season of Dragon Prince left a lot to be desired. It was just an all-round miss for me. Whilst the updated character designs were fun to see, at the same time, the narrative fell flat and the character arcs were lacking, particularly our main pairing of Callum and Rayla. Now I've upset myself by remembering how they butchered their early season arc in exchange for some cheap drama this season. Like seriously, how could they have possibly thought that that would go well? Or how they brought Viren back and did absolutely nothing with him? Or how they bungled Soren's whole arc and his troubled relationship with his family and turned him into a clown? Or how Ezran feels stale and underutilized as a character beyond giving vague, inspirational speeches? And the story just felt like it was spinning its wheels. The search for Erebos? It was just a whole lot of nothing. 2 whole story arcs, the main heroes, the main villains, dedicating that time and achieving nothing of value. And yeah, I'm not gonna lie, it was very annoying. I mean, we'd been waiting years for this thing to come out, and then you get hit with a season that was clearly not as good as the stuff we'd gotten before. You build up all that hype, all that excitement, and then it's like somebody jumps out from behind a bush and chucks a water balloon filled with ice water at your head. It's a bit sobering to say the least, but hey, at least the B storyline was good. Oh wait, no it wasn't, it was even worse. And I'd go so far as to say that it actively contributed to the less than stellar performance of the latest season. And of course, I'm talking about the storyline where the elves and the humans are living together in a tent city and working to build a new home for the Sun Elves. Only for cultural differences to lead to simmering tensions and an attempted coup by the Sun Queen's brother, who ends up failing and looking like a fool. And in theory, this should be some pretty good stuff. Rarely have we seen 2 cultures interact this way in the show. We've seen individuals react, and we've seen 2 opposing armies fight each other, like the battles at the Breach, or the Moon Elves when they whacked Harrow in Season 1, or when Viren and his army wiped out the Sun Elf city. But we've not seen them on a more personal level. And so, this was a cool chance to take a look at xenophobia/racism, and all of that sort of thing, through the lens of the Dragon Prince story. It had a lot of potential, especially since that was a big part of the early seasons. I mean, Viren was extremely xenophobic against elves and wanted their power for himself. Similarly, elves considered humans barbarian invaders. But it's through Callum and Rayla and Ezran, and then eventually Soren, that they unlearn these biases and begin to coexist as a peaceful collective. And indeed, that's what happens at the end of Season 3. Viren's army gets walloped by a combined force of humans, elves and dragons, and Zim returns to his mum, ushering in a new era of peace and prosperity. So it'd be interesting to see how that developed. The natural progression, the obvious pushback from both sides who have suffered, the growing pains, the learning curve. But that's not what we really got, not at all. And that was a bit frustrating. Because, like I said, in theory, it's a good idea, and the obvious direction for the story to go. So therefore, it's gotta be good, right? Wrong. This storyline was bad, like weirdly bad. It feels like it was bungled at literally every stage of its development, to the point that not only did it not live up to its potential, but in my eyes, it actively detracted from the rest of the season and was a slog to get through. And there are a fair few reasons for that. For starters, from the get-go, this storyline reeked of filler. Dragon Prince has an ensemble cast, a wide variety of important characters. Callum, Rayla, Ezran, Viren, Claudia, Soren, Zim. Those are probably the main ones that we're dealing with here. And I mean, yeah, there's other characters of note, but not ones that are interesting enough to base a whole storyline around. A storyline that exclusively follows their adventures, and thus, for a major storyline to have a lot of relevance or interest, at least for me, it makes sense to have at least one of these characters present to play a role within it. But that's not what happened. Literally every single one of those main characters, they're off with the main storyline, chasing Erebos. Claudia and Viren, they're trying to find the location of Erebos' prison to bust him out and allow him to fully restore Viren to life. And Team Zim's doing the exact same thing, but trying to prevent Erebos getting freed. And so, who are our main characters in this storyline? Amaya, who's fun and all, but is more a side character than anything else, and Janai, the Queen of the Sun Elves, who we've hardly ever seen before. Her brother, who we've never seen before, his wife, fiancé, can't quite remember, and also Amaya's interpreter. Because god damn it, surely they could use subtitles for Amaya communicating with her fiancé at this point, right? I mean, they're engaged, and she's only just started learning sign language. You serious? Did the interpreter have to go with them on dates for years and years until this point? How nightmarish. Can't imagine how awkward that would have been. Anyway, that's the main cast of this storyline. And I mean, there's also the human architect that gets put on trial, but yeah, she's more a plot point than a character. And she's rarely much of a focus within the scene itself. So already we have a couple of problems. One, this is supposed to be a key anchoring storyline, and yet we have to go through the motions of getting to know them better in season 4, learning about their characters and backstories, whilst also trying to tell a story about cultural differences, bias, and xenophobia. And so the story did end up feeling a little bit messy, with nobody to really care about. And in turn, this left it feeling quite flat. I've brought this up in a previous video before, but the whole storyline could have worked so much better if instead of Janai being pulled between her brother and Amaya, if maybe Ezran was there too, to try and act as the voice of reconciliation, the voice of forgiveness. It's very much a role that he would play, and I think it adds a whole lot more to the story, because for one, it allows a proper argument to play out on screen for both sides, and two, it has much bigger stakes. It's no longer a general, but the king addressing a queen. And if it doesn't go well and they kill this architect, it could spell the end of peaceful coexistence forever. And then from the elf perspective, it would look like a human king's throwing his weight around, trying to make them conform to his culture instead. And so instead of a black and white, clearly evil-coded brother who wants to usurp his wise and graceful sister, her brother now has far more motive and reasoning behind everything he's doing. As in his eyes, she's betraying her people and essentially making the Sun Elves subservient to the kingdom that destroyed theirs. Not to mention, the story itself felt like it kept changing, and to me, it was a bit confused and convoluted. Because the tale begins when Janai's younger brother tells her that perhaps they shouldn't get married. As in, Amaya and Janai, not Janai and her brother. Ugh. As after all, the elves might not fondly look on a human marriage to their queen. Especially after all that's transpired in the last couple of years, and so immediately we're framing the more conservative element within the Sun Elves as the villains. They want to stand in the way of our ship, after all, so they must be bad. How dare they, am I right? So the show's already setting them up as the villains early on, and pushing forward the idea of integration between the cultures, cooperation, forgiveness. But I can't help but feel like these villains are way too sympathetic from where I'm sitting for this storyline to have the right effect. Like, are we supposed to now forget that these cultures have been at war for years at the Breach? And, the name The Breach implies to me that the humans are trying to breach Zadia. Is that not pretty much the whole vibe of the early seasons? That humans have spent years trying to get into Zadia to steal their power with limited success? And then, when they finally manage to get in, with the help of Viren and his massive army, they slaughter the Sun Elves. They destroy them. They kill their queen, and they destroy their city. And this forces the elves to build a new home. And thus, on top of that, the elves are forced to rely on the generosity of the same kingdom that inflicted this hurt upon them. Then they're mocked and degraded for their beliefs. I mean, one of the big points of contention here is that the architect has no idea about the religious beliefs of the Sun Elves, despite having lived with them for some time. And thus, she sends what the elves consider to be that dude's mum's soul into the unknown. Lost forever. I mean, no shit he tries to kill her. Go into a churchyard in the Middle Ages and start kicking over tombstones and see what happens. And yet the elves, they're told to forgive, when in actuality, they're the victims, not the humans. And thus, Janai actually does seem like she's betraying her people because of her personal relationship. And I honestly don't think that's the intention of the story, but it's how it came across to me. And thus, instead of a villain, her brother seems like a misguided anti-hero. An anti-hero who did the wrong things for the right reasons. And so ultimately, the story feels poorly framed. You come away from it not knowing what to think. I mean, I feel like it's clearly meant to be good versus evil. A pretty tropey storyline. And thus, the ending is going to leave you dissatisfied and frustrated, which is not the kind of thing you want for your story. You should not be frustrated at the hero's triumph over the bad guy. But here, you kind of are, because he's kind of right, not completely, but somewhat. And it's enough to kind of destabilize the storyline. And so, yeah, I don't like the storyline. It was a waste of time. And it could have been so much better in so many different ways, but it was just written in the most basic, boring manner. And thus, it ended up being shit. Let's be real. But beyond this, I don't really have much else to say. And so, with all that being said, that's the end of the video, and I would like to remind you that these are just my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of the elves versus humans storyline? Did you like it? Hate it? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and let me know.